you sitting comfortably?
Oh, yes, yes.
Then I'll begin.
Even when you're just sitting around, we're rocking the talk.
Today's News Talk Radio.
TNT.
Welcome back, folks. Welcome back. It is Wednesday. We are still in the first hour of this live broadcast. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. Thank you for joining us here on this mission. Over the next 2 hours, we're going to bring you news and analysis from around the world. Let's hop over to Europe right now and also down to the African continent. I want to welcome onto the program our de facto default, our European correspondent, Freddie Ponton, independent researcher and journalist based in France. Freddie also keeps a very, very close eye on what's happening down below Europe in the massive continent of Africa. Freddie, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Patrick. It's good to be on the show.
And Freddie, the news broke about yet another coup brewing. You'll give us an update of where we're at with this story in a very, very important country called Senegal, one of the biggest Francophone countries, one of the most huge, massively populated metropolises in Dakar. So this is a massive news story here. Give us the lowdown on this latest. Is this a continuation of what we've seen in Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso over the last few months?
Well, it could appear that way. I think that everybody's still under the shock in Senegal, and I've been kind of looking into the price, the very little information we're getting. As you know, the internet was cut for a long period of time, prior to the announcement of the postponement of this presidential election to a later stage, probably in December the 15th, if I understood that correctly. But really what's interesting here, it's unexpected. Senegal is not known for instability. Actually, Senegal and the Senegalese people proud themselves of not being a banana republic. They're very proud of that because since their independence, if you look at the independence from the French colony, which took place around 1960, and there were about 3 years of bit of a turmoil. So it's really stabilized around 1963 when the republic basically was instituted. And when you look at that and you understand that since 1963, there has been absolutely zero coup d'etat and zero postponement of presidential election. Everything has been done on schedule as per the constitution of Senegal. So it's something that, the Senegalese are very proud of. And obviously we saw some turmoil in 2021 and then again in 2023 with an opposition that's obviously represents the will of the people, an opposition that represents the will of the street of Dakar and the rest of the countries as well. And I think it's very important to start this conversation by the demographic and explaining that Senegal, is a very interesting country because out of 18 million inhabitants, you got 50% of that population that is under 19 years old, Patrick. Very, very young population. And the word on the street for the past few years has been, we want to see change. So to answer your question as whether this is in the continuity of what we saw in Niger, in Burkina Faso, in Mali, and so on, of course, this has an influence on the youth. That there's this always when you're young, this kind of desire of independence and going for new adventure, perhaps trying new scenario, having new partners, but more importantly, having a future. And I think that today still Senegal is a country that suffers from many crises. There are still people that live under the soil of poverty. And it is extremely important for their democratic right, which they've been used to be respected. And we can see that this constitutional coup or this institutional coup, let's put it that way, has obviously raised concern not only domestically but also internationally, Patrick.
And it's worth noting as well that the economic community of West African states, ECOWAS, a number of countries have left recently or signaled they're leaving, namely Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and a lot of other countries in that West African bloc panicking now because ECOWAS is falling apart. And Nigeria, of course, is freaking out. because they say, well, they're the most powerful country in that union. So, of course, it's in their interest to want to keep it together, to use it as a lever of control and to their benefit. Or the West can work through Nigeria to control ECOWAS and West Africa like they do with Brussels. So where does Senegal sit on this? Because I think this is a big alarm bell for Washington. They're freaking out about the potential fracture and collapse of ECOWAS. Where is Senegal in that?
Well, in that it's very clear that the pressure coming from outside, you mentioned the United States, we saw some senators coming out with some very strong statements about, looking at stability and making sure that the democratic process is respected. So they cannot play double card on this one. It's just too volatile. You got 50%, 9 million of young people, you're telling them that they cannot have a normal election, and they got to believe the stunt that has just been put in front of their eyes. It's not going to work. It's going to end up on the street, and it's going to get bloody. So the United States know that. France, Germany, all the countries that have some interest in Senegal, even Russia has really sent some message, appealing the government to respect basically the constitutional right of the people of Senegal. Now, ECOWAS has a very, very delicate position, and it's good to mention them because they've actually came out yesterday with a statement, expressing basically the need to go back to constitutional law and making sure that these elections are taking place and not abusing the system, the legal system, or even the constitution itself, to buy some time, whatever the reason is. So ECOWAS has to play a very cautious card here, because with the stunt they put in Niger, as you mentioned, they've lost already 3 members, and this kind of move can be very contagious for the region. So they don't want to lose Senegal, because Senegal is a very stable country. It's a bit of a model, if you will, in West Africa. And surely with the late discovery of natural resources in the region, this country will definitely play even a much bigger role. So everybody's extremely cautious, because you see, nature hates, vacuums. They hates, emptiness, and if they don't fill that gap, someone will. So that's where we are at the moment. I think what's really interesting here is really to understand that this election was very popular, very anticipated. We recall 79 candidacy, which was presented. So there were 79 people presenting themselves for the job, for the top job. And in January, earlier this year, only 20 was selected. The problem is there was 2 major opposition leaders that was missing. One is very well known. His name is Ousmane, Sonko, and the other one is Karim Wadi. Karim Wadi is simply the son of the former Senegalese president Abdoulaye Wadi. And this is really interesting, by the way, for a little anecdote, if you're interested. But we saw, and we all remember, and especially the Senegalese will remember very well, in 2011 when Abdoulaye basically was on the verge of departing and leaving his throne to Macky Sall, the current president of Senegal, which has now basically had 2 terms. There were some tensions about and discussions about potentially postponing this election. And Macky Sall himself told that, well, if you postpone the election, this will be a direct challenge. We'll become a banana republic, because this is not something you do in Senegal, and this would not be welcome, and more really, it would not be constitutional. And here we are, 12 years later, and we have these guys doing exactly what he was describing, 12 years earlier. So as you see, sometimes politics and 12 years of presidency change a man, and I think Macky Sall has certainly changed, no doubt. Now, we need obviously to see really what's really going on, because Senegal domestic politics is very conservative. It doesn't take big positions, if you will. It's a very open dialogue kind of form of politics. This is not Washington, D.C., if you will, in a certain way. This is more open dialogue. Even if you have enemies, you keep basically the dialogue going. And that is reflected as well in the form of diplomacy that Senegal is applying around the world. We saw them, especially during the vote for the sanctions against Russia, where they could have simply go along with the program, but they didn't. They actually abstain. And that is really significant from the way policy and diplomacy and politics is conducted the Senegalese way.
So they postponed the election for 10 months. ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States, they're going crazy. They're saying, no, you can't do that. You need to have the elections. We demand you have the elections. So right now we have this postponement. And so what is the status there? Is there going to be a military caretaker government? We see also Israeli arms dealers lining up. That's an interesting story, which you exposed on your ex Twitter thread, Freddie. So, what are we looking at here? What is the status right now of the government? Where is the military right now in proximity to the control of the country? What's your reading of the current status?
Well, the current status in terms of security is simply, we saw on Monday, basically the riot police coming into the parliament, to the assembly, the National Assembly, because simply at the announcement, if you will, there's a couple of things that happened. Last Saturday, this is when Macky Sall, the current president, announced that he will postpone the election. Then they've been working on a report, to be able to explain the reason of this postponement and make a decision whether this will take place in August this year or at a later stage in December the 15th. So the decision was not really made, but it was actually made. The report was actually completed before even they came to the National Assembly. And that created a huge tension because they say, how come you made the decisions already in such a small amount of time? And the decision to not actually postpone them until August, which might have been negotiable perhaps, but to postpone them until December the 15th was made because, and if you read the report, it's quite unbelievable. They say that it was postponed because of the climate, because it's the rainy season in August in Senegal, and a lot of people will not be given the opportunity to make it to the voting booth. So they thought well, climate change, perhaps, that's a good reason. Now we'll postpone it 6 months, and you come back in December, we'll see what we get. However, when we look into the termings and the verbiage, it's very important here, Patrick, and we see that what the announcement on Monday was made, there was no announcements of postponement. I've read it a couple of times, I double-check it because I found it very bizarre that the word postponement was not there. And what we are saying here is that actually is repealing the possibility of actually a presidential vote to take place. That's not a postponement. That's something different. You're repealing basically the right for the electoral body to come together for an election. So you're basically taking away the right from people to decide, and to exercise their civil duty, and that's very insulting for the Senegalese, of course. So that into context, of course, you gather whatever's left of the opposition, because many have been thrown in jail, and we'll talk about that in a moment, especially the top leaders of the opposition. But we can clearly see that what's left of the opposition and the MPs were trying to say, no, this is a coup. They really felt, you could see how it works. It becomes actually, I would say, violent, but it becomes physical. People say, no, I'm protecting that desk. I'm not going anywhere. Nothing is going to sign. Nobody's going to approve anything. And they had to be removed by force. And when that happened, it's a coup. It's nothing else. It's a coup. You want to call it everywhere. Everybody's trying to be polite about it, but that is a coup. Okay, because the Constitution does not allow in any way, I think it's Article 130 in the Senegalese Constitution clearly states that you cannot postpone the election for any whatsoever reason. Even under emergency reason, I think you can't either. It has to be happening on time, on schedule. So very interesting. Yeah,
they haven't postponed an election in the history of the country. In fact,
1963 since 1963.
It's pretty amazing since they've gained independence. So this is massively historic, in fact.
it is historical, but we saw the wind of change, Patrick. We saw that already in 2021, and I think when we saw Ousmane Sonko, which simply has won the heart of the youth, and they know today clearly there's absolutely no doubt that Macky Sall and his camp they cannot win this election, not even close. Because the youth understand that they have to take their responsibility. This is a country that is well educated. This is not a banana republic. There's a people that knows what they're doing. There's a lot of the well-educated people. There are a lot of people that have been connected, that have studied in France or other countries as well. Many people are bilingual, trilingual. No, you get quality, you get engineers, you get a lot of things going on in this country. It's a rich country. It's 80% self-autonomous as far as food security is concerned. So that's very important. So they only import a little bit. They import from Russia and Ukraine the wheat. So Ukraine and Russia is very important for Senegal. I think 9% of the import come from Russia. And Senegal is the second principal partner of Russia in the sub-Saharan countries behind South Africa. So it is an important country. So very interesting to have this number in mind, because when you put this puzzle together, which we're still working on, we look back, we look at what happened. We saw, obviously, the horsemen. They went really after Ousmane Sonko, this young leader that has a very, very amazing, basically, story, working for the treasury and ending up really all the way as a top leader in the countries, in a verge of being in a position to win this election. It's quite incredible, but the youth is behind him, but he's been basically taken down on many occasions. They've tried to manufacture many cases against him for rape, for death threats and so on, but he was vindicated eventually on June the 1st, 23rd. He was acquitted actually of all charges, but then it came back to him on January 24th. So you can see how they don't let this guy go. They don't want him to even make it to the list so that he can be considered as a potential candidate, and they put him in jail for another 6 months, and on and on. So as we speak, the guy is still in jail. But he's a very interesting guy, and I'll tell you why it's very interesting, because I was wondering, why are they going after these guys? Apart from the fact that he's very popular with the youth, is there anything else that perhaps that we should know? So I like digging a little bit. And what I've realized is that Ousmane Sonko is the president of a party which was obviously completely demolished by the main and the current presidential party, because they don't want to see him around, but especially because he's been actually pointing the finger at corruption. And he actually wrote a book. He wrote a book about oil and gas and the corruption that is taking place by the government and how they're enriching themselves with the natural resources which has been discovered, especially very substantial, actually huge, immense deposit of gas in Senegal offshore. So he's already, kind of wrote a book about that. I think it was in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. And that has created, obviously, a lot of, if you will, tension amongst the elite, if you will, those that were used to be, kind of electing each other, if you will, with the blessing of France and perhaps other actors, but he's an outcast, if you will. He's he's the underdog, but he's an underdog that is not scared of speaking. He actually went to France to play charges against Macky Sall for crime against humanity. I guess they didn't treat him well in prison, to say the least. But they've done a lot of misery to this poor guy, and he's coming back. And it's, of course, this young generation is fully. I won't say all of them, perhaps that would be exaggerated, but a large proportion of them are behind him. And that's really scaring the hell out of the elite at the moment. And they don't know how to stop it, because what are they going to do? Are they going to be now showing to the world that Senegal is a banana republic? That's going to basically make them look terrible. Now, they cut the internet. They basically canceled a lot of journalism, a lot of television channel, a lot of censorship took place also on various social media and so on. So that prior this very important, ahead a few days before this election was supposed to be announced, and it was due to happen on the 25th of February, in 2 weeks' time. it went dark. People could not communicate. People could not gather. People could not protest. Could not organize themselves.
They cut the internet. Yeah,
they cut the internet. Yes,
they cut the internet.
Yeah. So that's something obviously that people are looking at, and it just looks bad. It looks bad for anyone that has been supported Macky Sall. We know the French government has been supporting Macky Sall for a while, and that's also something as well that might have played a role. And I think that nobody has talked about it, but I would like to touch upon that because I think it's important as well.
Let's hold that. Let's hold that till after the break, Freddie. We'll hold that till after the break. I want to talk about the geopolitics. I want to know where France is as a former Francophone country. France is losing its grip on Africa. All of its lovely colonial possessions are slipping away. And where is the United States and Russia and China on Senegal and West Africa specifically? Because that's where the big great power competition is. I want to hear about that on the other side from independent journalist Freddie Ponton. You're watching and listening TNT, Today's News Talk. We'll be right back after these messages.
De-weaponizing weather with reality and perspective.
So I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, because I'm doing a climate roundtable tomorrow. I'm assuming that the network that invited me on is probably the only network that's left around this part of the country that actually allows climate skeptics to be on. It'll be interesting because I'm sure there are going to be some people there to challenge me. In any case, when I walked into the hotel, the person at the front desk was from Adelaide, Australia, the city of churches. See, I learned something, right? And I got to thinking that maybe tomorrow I will spring on the people that are there for almost unprecedented climate events that have occurred around Australia that are very, very important around the climate. Now, not directly with Australia, but north of Australia, the typhoon season, despite the fact that we supposedly had an El Nino going, was way, way below normal. Third lowest ever. That's very unusual. And that was the first hint that this El Nino wasn't what it was cracked up to be. As a matter of fact, the Southern Oscillation Index, which is the longest running metric of the El Nino, never got into El Nino category this year until now. But that was unprecedented when you had what we call the Oceanic Nino Index being so strong. That's two unprecedented things. Number three, the crash that is occurring in the Southern Oscillation Index is going to be the greatest on record from January to February. In fact, it may be the greatest on record from one month to another. It is unprecedented to see January with an above SOI and then February crashing the way this is. Now, in 1978, we had a weak El Nino going, and then it crashed in February. By the way, they had all those floods in Los Angeles in 78. How about that? The fourth thing, the unprecedented warming of the ocean just to the east of Australia in a month or two. See that? Tonight's Climate and Weather Watchdog was all about Australia. It's because I ran into someone from Adelaide. This is TNT Climate and Weather Watchdog meteorologist Joe Bastoni asking you to enjoy the weather. It's the only weather you got.
Speaking on the issues that impact. This is the Patrick Henningsen Show on TNT Radio.
All right, folks, welcome back. We're still in the first hour of this live broadcast. I'm your host, Patrick Henningsen. Thank you for rejoining us here at Today's News Talk. It is Wednesday. We're getting into geopolitics in a big way with the biggest country, or one of the biggest countries in Africa, Senegal. Is a coup brewing? Where are things sitting politically? Geopolitically as well, you have the great powers vying for influence and control over the African continent. This is a major piece of the puzzle, as is some of the other big West African states like Nigeria, but Senegal is a potential emerging power in the African political and geopolitical landscape. Joining us right now to discuss this is independent researcher and journalist from France, Freddie Ponton, joining us on the line right now. And Freddie, before the break, you mentioned the specter of that little man in the suit from Élysée Palace, Emmanuel Macron, America's little corporate coffee boy. He's milling about. What's going on there? How's this going to affect the political situation in Senegal?
Well, I think it's quite clear. We can call Macron many things, but stupid is not one of them. He's someone that calculates everything. He's not very good at many other things, but that he knows how to calculate. He's a banker. And the calculations are very simple. I think looking at the poll, looking at a couple of projections, it was quite clear that Macky Sall will never be elected president. He doesn't have the support, and the person that he was bringing forward, which we'll talk about in a moment, is someone that simply has not managed to create a consensus around himself. Someone that has not been able to gather the troop to be successful, to be appealing enough so that when the election campaign and the presidential campaign come around, he could be placed as the next president, according to the wish of Macky Sall and perhaps the wish of Emmanuel Macron and his presidency. So I think what the calculation was is that they needed to keep in touch with the opposition. So if you wanted to know who's the real threat to Macky Sall, well, you just have to look at where Macron is going to send his emissary and his ambassadors, and they send him straight away to Ousmane Sonko. So clearly, Ousmane Sonko is the man to watch, and is the man that has the popularity to the point that Nadège Choua, which literally she's the number two, of the Élysée Palace for the Africa department, and she's very close to Macron. So when Macron wants something done on the side in Africa, she's the one that he sends. So we know when she goes, it's about having a private conversations, let him know that Macron's going to be supporting him, if this is the way the election is going to go, and he wants to entertain a good relationship with him and so on, keeping the thing smooth, because a lot of countries are watching, a lot of watching. So what I'm saying here, it's really interesting because it outlined two things. First, there was no candidate suitable to win these elections, which will be basically continuing what Macky Sall has done over the past 12 years. Okay, so there's no real descendants, if you will, in this political track. There's no one to follow, and that's basically the weakness. So people are trying to understand, but why would he postpone it? Is it because he's just another greedy African leaders? You want to stay, the money is good, the power is, make him feel good, a young man. No, it's not about that. It's because he wants to go, but there's no one to ensure the business behind it. Because Macky Sall has been involved with a lot of business with a lot of countries, and Senegal is a rich country, as I said, and especially with this new gas and very, really huge reserve of gas offshore Senegal, a lot of people literally starting to flock in the country and literally starting to sign contracts. So of course you can sign as many contracts as you want, you can promise as much as you want, but the next president, if he's not one of your guy, you might not get paid. Simple as that. Now I'm not saying that this is a full-time corruption job, of course not, but what I'm saying is that these kind of deals involve backends, there's no doubt about it. So we needed to look at who actually really was one of the first to go there as soon as the gas was discovered and it was open for business. And funny enough, who we found there in 2022, actually in May 2022 to be precise, is Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor of Germany. Chancellor of Germany is going to fly official visit, going to meet directly with Macky Sall. And what they're going to talk about? They're going to talk about gas, because Germany is basically has cut its relationship with the Russians. Nord Stream pipeline is a souvenir, and in November it needs gas. Right. So the idea that Germany never needed gas and wanted to go to a renewable, okay, fair enough. But at the end of the day, they still need a lot of gas. So cutting Russia is one thing, but they need to go and get gas. Now, gas in Senegal is good. Is good because maritime routes are very easy for Germany. They can put a tanker outside there. It's rather straightforward, but they got to wait for the production to start. Now, we know from the numbers and from the report, which I read a little bit, that the production was starting to come in 2023, late 2023. And they might have had a couple of delays as well attached to that. So which means that by the time we go to the elections, no gas has really kind of actually reached the shore of Germany, no real big deal has produced anything, and the president is about to leave the shore. That's bad business for someone that has worked for years to get that and to get his, let's put it together, his bonus for his departure. So I think that, without being too insulting to the man, I think there is a lot of business under the table that is done here, whether it's for gas. As you mentioned earlier, we saw a lot of contractors in the defense industry as well, extremely interested in Senegal, with companies like Adi Consultants, the Adi Consultant Groups. We knew them. I knew them when they were in Abu Dhabi, but they're very prominent in Africa. They're actually very specialized in West Africa. The reason, because the president of Adi Khan's is Moroccan. He's Moroccan. His name is Gabi Perez. His son is Ori Perez. They're Moroccan Jews, so they have probably double nationalities. They can work. They have company in Israel. We track them down. They have holdings, and some of the part of the holdings are owned by Gabi companies as well, Adi Khan. So I've got pretty much that. There was some WikiLeaks as well dumped on them, so we have a lot of information about these guys. But what's interesting is they've been very prominent and very focused on Senegal. They've been trying to get very much involved with technology related to the Air Force of Senegal and selling some very expensive technology, especially in the telecommunication and communication sectors. And then what they do, these companies, they offer also a credit line. I think the credit line that Perez offered to Macky Sall was around 300 million euros. So for a country that has a terrible balance sheet, it's a lot of debts. And I think the youth is starting to understand that these presidents are basically packing up debts, and they are the one that's going to be basically staying behind paying these debts, So they want to be part of that decision mechanism, and I think they can see corruption everywhere. So you get the gas, you get the defense. It's just too much, and I think that before they ruin, I think they want to be heard, and that's what basically Ousmane Sonko incarnate.
Well, I know they have a massive LNG project. This is on the sort of border with Mauritania, Senegal's neighbor to the north. That is the really rich gas area. Then LNG project that would ship liquefied natural gas for export, obviously to Europe. So yeah, and it's hit lots of delays. They're lacking investment. So I can see the European players swooping in, vying for influence, maybe to secure some of that supply in the future. So there's also the pipeline projects in Africa to bring gas from West Africa directly into Europe, but it has to cross through, let's say, hostile territory to make it there. So there's a lot of deals that have to be made. But before we break here, we're coming up to the top of the hour. Where's the geopolitics on this? Because certainly the United States will have its interest. You've talked about France, obviously, and other European players. But between the U.S., Russia, and China, where does Senegal sit on that spectrum?
Well, for that, you obviously have to look in terms of the moment. As I said, this is really the battle of the corridors. Everywhere in the world, the world is basically shifting and reorganizing its supply chain, if you will. So the balance of the corridors applies as well in West Asia, as well as they apply in Africa. And everyone is going to want to have access to that particular market, point of entry that are basically extremely well equipped, that has already have all the necessity to welcome bigger trade, but also countries that have stability. Remember when we talked about the BRICS, there's a very important debate about the BRICS. One of the main components of the BRICS in terms of for them to choose which candidate is the right candidate for them. Well, a country that is stable, a country that has no coup, a country that has never postponed any election, a country that is the second major partner to Russia, for example, behind South Africa. I think the export, I was looking at numbers, we're talking about 9% of Senegal export comes from Russia. The main exports come otherwise 33% from Europe, of course. And China is not far behind as well. So when you find Russia, you always find China. China is using in the defense sector in West Africa. They've done very well for themselves. And Senegal is definitely on their roadmap as well. So a lot of commercial interest, but also a lot of geopolitical interest in the bigger pictures. And I think that definitely, I don't say that Russia is behind anything there. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that if you look at, the conflict in Ukraine, for example, and I'm going to make a good analogy so that you can compare that. Russia didn't have much to do. All they have to do is to let NATO screw it up. They had to let them do the mistakes. And now they're going to do more and more mistakes, right? But Russia doesn't have much to do. All they have to do is to let them make these mistakes until the natural comes back. The natural course of affairs comes back and reality hits the ground. And that's exactly what they're going to do with Senegal. They're not going to intervene. They're not going to want to get involved in there. They're just going to look at it. They're going to let basically the people decide. And when the people have decided, then they'll come and do what everybody does, because that's just simple economic relationship and supporting the idea of sovereignty. And I think if you look across the sub-Saharan belt, all these countries are thriving. They are absolutely, really, really thirsty for independence, sovereignty, and stability, and under corruption. And they want to have good relationship with different options. And I think the BRICS bring the finance, they bring the solutions, and they also bring something outside of the CFR. And Senegal, I know it's been in discussions in the background, but a lot of people want to get out of this French colonial money, and they should. And they should. Mm.
That's a big one. And you mentioned Senegal is, a pretty formidable agricultural country, and they're practically food secure. So Russia provides, the agricultural backing. That's one of their biggest exports, and nitrates, fertilizer, also the technology, the know-how for big farming. These are all things that Russia excels at, which it's now exporting to other African countries. So that's another thing Russia brings to the table. The U.S. brings that to the table, but you have to do big deals with Cargill and Koch Industries and all these, which involve all these predatory financial loan relationships that are all tied up in credit lines and stuff like that. I mean, you know where that leads. Russia's not offering that type of deal. So that's interesting. And on the defense side, that's also interesting. China, Russia have a lot to offer, a lot of these countries, to get off the U.S. system, to get off U.S. anti-aircraft systems, get off the U.S. system. So otherwise, Washington literally controls your military. People don't realize, if you buy from America, you don't just get the gear, you get the staff, you get all the military attaches, you get all the generals. They end up camping there. The British and the Americans move in to service their gear. So it's not like you will end up being occupied to some degree, and you probably won't even have control of the ammunition. So this is what's happening. So people are like,
that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah,
that is exactly what's happening. But I think really, in terms of security, food security is very important for Senegal. It's really, for me, on the top of the agenda. I don't think defense is a major issue, but food security is a big thing, because obviously we're talking about people livelihood, people ability to feed themselves, and you don't want a famine. When you run a country, that's the last thing you want. That's a nightmare for a president, to be responsible for a famine in your country, and that is probably why Macky Sall, abstended at the United Nations, not basically to be in an awkward situation, neither with Ukraine nor with Russia, because they have a very short period for agriculture in terms of growing the crop because of the rainy season. They can't miss it. So they need to grow fast, and they need a lot of fertilizer. And as I said, these fertilizers come from these two countries. They got to keep it right. They got to keep it safe.
So those are the big issues. Freddie Ponton, Africa, keeping an eye on geopolitics and happenings there. I really appreciate you joining us for this update this week on TNT, Today's News Talk. There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is a journalist, Freddie Ponton. Follow him on X, Twitter as well. That's where I'm getting all my updates with what's going on in that part of the world, where you should be as well. Top of the hour news headlines coming up, and we got a lot of ground to cover on the other side. AI censorship. We got Basil Valentine with the Middle East report, all that and more. So stick around. We'll be back in a few minutes.